Hi everyone, Christina Werner here. Welcome to another video for SimonsStamp.com. Today I'm using the Spring Bouquets stamp set. It has really big arrangements of flowers. It's really perfect for those of us who love to color these big floral images and don't want to have to deal with masking and anything fussy to get a nice big grouping of flowers. So I'm going to be doing some watercoloring today on some Fabriano Artistico extra white cardstock, or watercolor paper, I should say. So I'm removing it from my 5x7 block, and then I have it in my MISTI stamp positioning tool. I want the flowers to span across the cardstock or across the watercolor paper, and it doesn't quite fit in my MISTI with it turned this direction. So I'm going to have it hang out the side of my MISTI, and then I'll just do all my stamping this way. I'm going to be stamping and embossing with white embossing powder. So I've prepped the watercolor paper with an anti-static powder tool and then inked up my stamp with VersaMark ink. I'm going to stamp this a couple of times to make sure I get a really good impression. Now, my paper doesn't really slide around or move too much because the watercolor paper is very, very dry. So it's not going to have the stamps stick to the paper like some smoother cardstocks would. So I don't have to worry about it sliding around too much, which is great because, as you saw, my paper was hanging out the side of my MISTI. I'm adding my white embossing powder right onto my stamped image. And after I have the alabaster embossing powder from Brutus Monroe applied, I'll shake off the excess and then use my heat tool to heat set it until it's smooth and melted. I then taped my watercolor panel down to a hardboard so that I can paint all over this to edge and not worry about it warping or anything like that. I'm going to be using some Magella Mission Gold paints today, and I'm going to be using the colors pretty much straight from the palette. I'm not going to be mixing them at all. But the first thing I'm doing is adding a bunch of water because this first layer of color is going to have the colors right up against each other, and I want them to kind of blend and have really soft edges. Starting out with this bright yellow shade, adding that over the daisy image, and then I'm bringing in a nice red violet, kind of letting that fade out to white a little bit at the bottom. I'm going over that area where the colors meet in order to encourage them to blend and kind of spread out. I've added purple and some blue. I'm going to add a bright red-orange, another red color, then just a little bit of green right in that little spot up there, just for a little spot of green. I used a clean paintbrush just to move those colors around a little bit, get those colors mixing and melding. And then at this point, I tipped my board to encourage those colors to move around. And then I hit this with my heat tool. Now, when you speed up the drying process with a heat tool, that stops the colors from moving. So make sure your colors are where you want them to be before you use a heat tool on them. So for this second layer of color, I'm going to be coloring the flowers individually, all the little petals. And I'm adding in just a complementary color on top. So this rose image over here was mostly all pink. So I used a purple shade to shade it. This daisy, I'm using an orange-red shade to add color into all those little areas. Even when it goes over areas where the color underneath is completely different, it's going to help solidify the color on this one image. I've sped up the painting process so you can see how this goes from start to finish. But basically what I'm doing is adding colors on top, letting the colors sort of be a little bit transparent so you can see the color underneath glowing through. And painting this way gives really interesting color combinations, especially as we get into these leaves that are on the top and bottom of our bouquet. Over that green area, it looks just fine, but as I start to paint the green over the red, it turns a little bit more brown because red and green are complementary colors, which means when they're mixed together, you get mud. So I'm using it very sparingly, not adding too much. I added some brown to the center of those flowers and then started to bring in more green on some of the leaves. So I'm going to continue painting all of these flowers, just making sure to add some more darker shades into the center of the flowers because that's where more shade would be, and just accentuating each one of these leaves. After all of the painting was complete, I decided to trim off this design a little bit. I did love the yellow that was right above there, but I wanted to have the flowers right at the edge of the card design. So I cut it down to 5 inches tall and 4.5 inches wide. Now this is going to create an oddly sized card, but it will still fit inside an envelope that is meant for a 5x7 card. So it'll just be a little bit shorter. Using this transparency grid sheet to help get my greeting from that Spring Bouquet stamp set onto my project completely straight. I'm lining it up along those grid lines and also along that center line, and then I can position it, close my MISTI, and then pull off that grid transparency sheet, and then it leaves my stamp at the perfect position for stamping. I'm using some VersaMark Onyx Black ink, and I'm going to actually stamp this twice just to make sure that I have a really black, stark impression. But because it has very dainty words at the bottom, I made sure to not press too hard. I just wanted it to kiss the paper, so I got a really good stamped impression. I used some foam tape on the back of my watercolor panel and then adhered that to a white card base. So the finished card was 5 inches wide by 5.5 tall, so just outside of square. It's a really fun little shape, a little bit odd. I hope you guys enjoyed seeing how this card came about. All of the supplies that I used today are available over at simonsystamp.com. And thank you so much for watching. I'll see you guys in another video very soon.